It might be just us, and I'm okay to start on time.
Would you like me to start the introduction? Is that a yes? Well, colleagues and friends, welcome. Good to see you all. As you know, we are offering this clergy training workshop on dementia care beyond the fear, which is led by the Reverend Dawn Jefferson. So I welcome you to this event. This has been a team effort with the encouragement of Jack Davidson, our senior pastor. We began to explore this question of how the entire church community could become more aware of what it means to support people with dementia and the persons who care for them. And with Kara Slattery as our care coordinator, we were able to put together this workshop and have the Reverend Dawn Jefferson lead us and really conceive of the whole program, which we began with an all-church workshop 2 weeks ago. If you missed that session, you can find it on YouTube. This entire series came from the realization that in our church, we have seen an increasing prevalence of cognitive decline, and we wanted to offer the whole church the opportunity to learn how to support persons with dementia and their caregivers. And I imagine that you are here for this reason. At our church, we are holding the perspective that differences based on cognitive impairment are understood and held in the love of God and neighbor and self. And yet, as clergy, we may not have been trained about how to take these practical steps to make that theology come alive in our church families, to make that visible. And that's why we're here today. Many of you know Pastor Dawn. She devoted much of her work for her MDiv at Yale to these questions. She herself is a caregiver to her parents, and she knows the struggles that this illness brings. Her mission, her call, is to illuminate the path of caregivers and the beloved people for whom they care from a faith perspective. These workshops also show what we can do in cooperation with our Southern New England Conference of the United Church of Christ. We received a special grant from the Ann Higgins Fund, and we thank the conference for their support. This meeting is being recorded and it will be posted to YouTube. Since our time is short and everything that we can learn from Dawn is so important to us, I'll turn it over to her right away.
Let me share my screen. All righty. But what about you? Jesus asked the disciples. Who do you say that I am? Will you pray with me? God be with us and direct us in this brief time today. Guide us towards deeper understanding and encourage us for the ministry ahead. Spark in us revelation around ministering to our congregations, communities, and world in light of the challenges of daily living, caregiving, and cognitive decline. Help us to usher into our spaces acknowledgement, acceptance, and processing the opportunities given within the context of dementia. We are depending on you to help us practice and apply grace to ourselves and to those we love and serve. Remind us and encourage us again of our calling to the ministry of the gospel, to work towards radical inclusivity to the end that we all can live well, love well, and care well. In Christ's name I pray, as you can pray to the God of your own understanding. Amen. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank Senior Pastor Jack Perkins Davidson and Reverend Claire Robert, Chaplain, and Kara Slattery, the Care Coordinator at Spring Glen, and all of my Spring Glen family in Hamden, Connecticut, for supporting me and sharing in this way with you this afternoon. I'm especially grateful for the Ann Higgins Fund established by the Historic Connecticut Conference, especially to train clergy and others for ministry to older adults. And I'm grateful that this video will be available to you. This is a very hopeful beginning, and I look forward to making myself available to extend this work with those of you who have questions and important strategies to share. And as I'm presenting and talking, you can type questions in the chat, or if they're private, you can stay anonymous and send them directly to Karis, who is our moderator. And we shall remain muted for the first part of today's presentation, and I can address things in about 10 minutes and then talk again. And then after 15 minutes, it's all open for questions. I chose to study this topic for very personal reasons. I am a caregiver to parents who both have dementia with different expressions. I am also a pastor. I have compiled this presentation to be shared with pastors or lay leaders who minister to people and their caregivers. I presented a much longer presentation last week to the entire congregation, which may offer more specific context. I'll try my best not to repeat all of that here and make that a little bit more concise. After having watched the changes in my own parents over the course of the last 10 years, I have noticed a great deal about how this condition affects its patients and those they love. Again, for the purposes of this presentation, I will often refer to what I have witnessed with my parents as examples and my subsequent research during seminary and for this grant. I do understand that your examples in clergy experience and staff experience may vary. And I want to clarify lastly that I am not a medical professional. I am an ordained minister and I am a daughter. And that's what brings us here today. I feel obligated when I share this to share the brief story of my mother, and here it is. I'm an only child. My mother, Alma Teresa Jefferson, is my best friend. She is the eldest of 5 siblings. She is a true firstborn child with a deep sense of responsibility for others. She has anxiety and the need for control. Hello, eldest siblings out there. She is a perfectionist. She cares deeply about details. And she's always worked in an office, whether around paper or computers. My mom wanted to be a lawyer. Instead, she became a college administrator. She has always loved God, and her great aunt, who was a Pentecostal preacher, used to bring my mom to her storefront church on Sunday so my mother could help sweep out the church and set up the folding chairs. Now, it was my dad who recited the "Now I lay me down to sleep" prayer each night, and it was my mother who took me to church every week until I moved away to college. My parents believed that if I went to church, it would keep me connected with our Black community, and that while I was going to private school, if I was around the Black church each week, I wouldn't forget who I am. An interesting statement. What even they may not have been able to predict was that I would grow deeply connected to God, so much that I felt God's calling to the ministry. Again, for those who might have seen it before, but just want to introduce that my mom is pictured here in white. She is ordained as a deaconess in the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. And my mother told me once that outside of having me, being ordained as a deaconess was the thing she was most proud of. She was so honored to serve in this way. As a deaconess, she prepared the communion table, prayed for members, and visited those in the hospital and those who could not return to church anymore. In December 2019, after my mother agreed to move to Virginia, closer to us, and live in an independent living apartment, she was assessed. The neurologist note said, quote, "No diagnosis found," end quote. 75-year-old female here to establish care for dementia. Her clinical picture is consistent with Alzheimer's disease with behavior disturbance, and it appears the onset was likely a few years ago. It was a challenging day to get that. But I must confess that as I truly love and honor the community church that I grew up in and where my mother belonged and served, they weren't ready to minister to people with dementia. And that my mom served so many people who were ill and then in turn did not get visited was a hard thing to watch. I am here today to share our story so the church can be more readied to reach out, recognize the signs, and stay engaged with all its members with cognitive impairment and the care partners who love them. In the midst of my coping with being a caregiver for my mom, I read Professor John Swinton's book, Dementia, Living in the Memory of God. I read this quotation and it truly restored my hope. If God forgets us, will we cease to exist? But God does not forget us. God's mercy is not bound by time, space, or neurology in the way that human memory is. While human memory is fallible, constructed, and uncertain, God's memory is sure and oriented toward action in the present. And in my deep prayer and speaking to my great fear, this quotation saved me. Our identity is safe in the memory of God. I share that with you all as my colleagues. And if there's anything you take away today, that's what I'd like you to recall to your members and to caregivers in your congregations. So that's my brief introduction about how I got here and partly why I'm giving this presentation. It started with my mother, and being a person of faith and living in church for almost my whole life, I've come to see some missed opportunities that we as the body of Christ and leaders in churches have to meet the needs, not only of this illness, but of how we take care of God's people. Moreover, I kept wondering, what would it be like if I ministered to each soul the way I minister to folks with dementia? And how could that be a model for care? These three major points will be what I discuss in this section. First, God more than medicine, experience more than expertise, and lastly, including multidisciplinary plans and models. But what about you? Jesus asked the disciples. Who do you say that I am? This scripture in Mark speaks to me in this work. In light of what our yes is, who we say Jesus is will determine our ministry to those living with dementia. And who we say our loved ones and members living with dementia are will confirm that identity in their hearts as well. So yes, I'm breaking the rule of long quotations on a slide, but this is the one after the first one that got me. And it is, I believe, at the heart of what Professor John Swinton posits related to the practical theology of dementia. As I continue to learn what this calling is, this ministry thing, this quotation reminds me what makes me different. I am called to be a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ, so my treatment and ministry of dementia must prioritize that. Swinton writes, at a very basic level, well-being within Christianity is not gauged by the presence or absence of illness or distress. Religious beliefs and practices may well have therapeutic benefits, but that is not their primary function or intention, nor is the efficacy of a spiritual intervention theologically determined according to the criteria such as reduced anxiety, better coping, or reduction in depression, important as these things may be at a certain level. Theologically speaking, he says, well-being has nothing to do with the absence or reduction of anything. It has to do with the presence of something, the presence of God in relationship. Well-being, peace, health, what the scripture describes as shalom, has to do with the presence of a specific God in particular places who engages in personal relationships with unique individuals for formative purposes. He also goes on to say that rather than alleviating anxiety and fear, the presence of such a God often brings on dissonance and psychological disequilibrium, but always for the purpose of the person's greater well-being, understood and redemptive and relational terms. I know that was a lot, but honestly, if you take a snapshot of this slide later, I think it would be helpful as a basis or a foundation for your own training for other clergy and staff members. Surely we believe in the brilliance and gifts of modern medicine. But when caregivers and members come to you, it is not for a medical diagnosis. They will come to you because you have been ministering about the presence of God. And I just wanted to foreground that. Not only is it on Dr. Swinton's heart, but it's on mine as well. And all of those offices and appointments and during that time and trying to understand what was going on with my mother, I really wanted somebody who knew God to tell me about what was happening. I didn't want the pastor to tell me about the medical diagnosis and necessarily how many other people he had known with Alzheimer's, helpful, but what do you have to say about God? So just for you to have some resources, I'll also have a list. Karis has a link she'll drop in later. For a reading course at Yale Divinity School, I focused on two main texts to guide my process of contemplation. One was Dementia, Living in the Memories of God by John Swinton. And the other one is The Disabled God by Nancy Eastland. I most recently have been reading other books by Professor Swinton, who is a Scottish Black theologian. He is the chair in Divinity and Religious Studies at the School of Divinity, History and Philosophy at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland. He is also the founder of the university's Center for Spirituality, Health, and Disability. And what moves me most about his story is that he's not just an academic. That's the end of his career, as it were. He actually started out as a nurse and then developed relationships with people experiencing mental health illness and then dementia. I will reference these texts throughout my presentation. And as I said, John Swinton's book gave me great hope, reformed for me how God cares for us. And Nancy Eastland, that's just a classic book that you should just read as a pastor in general to understand the experiences of people with disability and how Nancy Eastland describes it as it clearly is a blessing. And that if you try to heal her from her disability, she would cease to be herself. So it's a really important theological lens I think we should have when we're having this dialogue. And lastly, the book there is Mental Health. John Swinton also does a great deal of work with mental health, and I just read this book last week, and I feel like it's a good resource. It tells a couple of stories of people experiencing bipolar disease, dementia, depression, and some of the treatment, some of the care that we need to give people with dementia is very similar, since dementia is a kind of mental illness. The more I learned to take care of my mother and father, the more I reflected on what kind of ministry could have served them 20 years ago to prepare them for their present dementia. What kind of sermonic themes could have prepared me to be a caregiver and a better minister? Swinton writes that the resurrection is not an event which relates only to the past, something we get caught up on with people with Alzheimer's and forgetting and what happened before now. He says to remember Jesus is to bring him and the sacrifices and blessings that he represents into the present and to allow the memorial presence of Jesus to change, challenge, and strengthen us. It is also to look to the present and the significance of this great act of God as it works out its transforming power in the here and the now of human existence. This is an aspect of God's timelessness that takes on great significance for people with dementia. Dorothy Lithicum and Janice Hicks wrote a book called Redeeming Dementia, and they say that the neediness of others allowed them to help us to be accountable to God. The community is accountable to maintain the identity of those with dementia and enable them to be accountable to God and their neighbors when possible. Are we preaching enough about resurrection in the present tense? Can we preach more about vulnerability, dependence, neediness? In the book Mental Health, Swinton writes that forgiveness is at the heart of the gospel message. And many people experiencing mental illnesses can end up blaming themselves for their situation. They question, is my illness caused by something I have done? Should I do something or stop doing something? Is God punishing me? And people can feel that their disturbances and strange experiences, their even attempts at killing themselves, their depressions, and perhaps even their violence have caused pains to themselves, their family, and their friends. Feelings of guilt can devour folks. I recall that my mother believed that illness, like mental illness, were a part of punishment, that mental torment came from Satan. And I couldn't remove that theology from her psyche or spirit before she became ill. And that is one of my regrets for her. There are times when she has deep peace because she's believing what she knows to be true, that God will never leave her or forsake her. She sings to God and prays to God all day. And when she's afraid, when she is grateful, God is real to her. And I don't believe that will ever change. And as I am a keeper of her story, I must always include that. To admit it would be to deny her dignity and integrity. But sometimes the time she lost wondering whether God still loved her because of her confusion was something I wished I could have helped her correct in that theology. Also, the concept of belonging. Swinton goes on to make really great clarifications about how inclusion is good, but belonging is better. To belong, you need to be missed. To belong, others need to long for you, the way the prodigal father longed for his son. To belong, we need to feel that we matter. Belonging destroys loneliness and fear. And lastly, an important conversation that Eastland gives in The Disabled God is that all of us will live with disability at some point in our lives. And that disability issues are not only for the interest of people living with disabilities, they are of interest to all people, because at some stage, all people will become disabled. It is just a matter of time. These pictures might be a little bit difficult to see, but just kind of thematically, this concept of several circles. This is called the 5 dimensions of the person, and it's adapted from Beck, Rawlings, and Williams' work. Swinton includes it in his book on mental health care. And this model offers an image of the complex self and our experiences. This dotted circle is to represent the way in which the spirit is permeated and permeates different aspects of our lived experience. It is the meaning and purpose that a person has discovered within their life, which gives them the strength to find meaning and purpose within their sufferings. If this is so, which it doesn't always happen. But mental health care will have as much to do with providing a relational and spiritual context that will enable a person to live with their problems and find meaning and hope in the midst of them, as it will have with overcoming difficulties and curing illness. Healing understood in this way is intricately connected with spirituality and the spiritual quest. Again, clarifying that we are a part, that is to say, ministers, clergy, people within faith communities are a part of these 5 dimensions. We as clergy need to be making strategic connections to collaborate with social workers, therapists, and medical professionals. Our congregants need a coordinated care across these disciplines to address all of these dimensions. And of course, he also has a similar circle diagram related to dementia. This will be on the screen, so hopefully you can view or zoom in when you look at the recording. But it's very interesting to see the ways in which dementia undermines certain ones of those circles, and useful to name how those dimensions shift. Super quickly, I feel an obligation to clarify what dementia is whenever I'm talking, in case people think it's something else. So here we go. This is the Dementia Umbrella. It helps to show you that dementia is a big term that manifests in lots of different diagnoses. Alzheimer's is not the only kind of dementia. It is just the most prevalent. And some of the symptoms can overlap. Some people can have 2 kinds of dementia. What I've come to understand about dementia is that it is hard to pin down. I would like it to be a more concrete diagnosis, but it is not. It is often understood by its symptoms, and symptoms that manifest after a person may have had dementia for some time. I share this umbrella slide to give you a heads up that there are many types. And some of the frustration for family members in this journey is to get to a diagnosis. There's a lot of time you spend trying to do, okay, what's this, what's happening? And you're watching and looking at the signs. And so when you finally can get a diagnosis, it can maybe ground you a little bit. But it only begins to deal with the mystery of what will happen next. It will be important that you as clergy take note of what kind of dementia is diagnosed so that you can prepare your staff for different kinds of behaviors. You have to memorize them, but at least take note because they all represent different things. Lewy body dementia is different from vascular dementia, is different from frontal temporal dementia, and they all affect different parts of the brain. I have a dear friend with frontotemporal dementia. He does not have memory loss like my mother does. Instead, because the part of his brain that is affected relates to inhibition, he has decreased sense of self-awareness and will say socially inappropriate things, which seem gendered. So as a man, if he's around women and he says something about sexuality or seems like he's making a pass, that's an inappropriate behavior that is instigated by his brain. We need to train our members for that awkwardness and get us ready to hold him and his godly, God-loving self through these kinds of brain changes. So awkward behavior, screaming, using curse words, those kinds of things happen with people with dementia. And if we're really going to lean in and care for them, we kind of have to be ready and strengthen ourselves to be prepared to respond to those kinds of moments. Lastly, this is a quick definition of dementia, essentially a decline in memory, language, and problem solving, essentially after a person's ability to, that affect a person's ability to perform everyday activities. There's a general way we all go about, and when you look at a person with dementia, you recognize how much more challenging it can be to do things that we think are simple. And this is all because of brain changes, and we have to come to an understanding as a society that dementia is not the same thing as aging. There are people who are aging and they're going to be into their 90s without these kinds of symptoms. This is a specific way that the brain changes. As clergy, we need to look out for these symptoms, pay close attention to what's changing in our members. Too much attention has been given to memory loss. We have to look at the other behaviors. I'm going to keep saying it because it's important. I recognize that my mother began to isolate herself. She dropped out of lifelong passions and withdrew from her church community. My mother adored being a deaconess. And one month, she was sending me irate emails about conversations and altercations she was having with other deaconesses and the pastor. She started to seem paranoid and exhibited feelings of rejection and exclusion. She was in charge of this ministry, but no one was respecting her anymore. It was all very out of character and really odd, but we didn't connect it to dementia. We missed the signs. Then she had trouble filing her taxes one year and filing her taxes, and she just couldn't find any of the pieces to file them, and that task dragged on for 2 years. Sometimes she'd forget to eat, forget to take her medication. She couldn't schedule the appointment. It was just a cycle of confusion. Those are the kinds of symptoms that are dementia. Not forgetting your keys, not forgetting someone's name momentarily. It is deep-seated and it actually shifts the way you experience your daily life. And yet, an important quotation by Christine Bryden, who's a very well-known person living with dementia who goes around and speaks around the country. She's from Australia. She says, "I believe that I am much more than just my brain structure and function, which is declining daily." She says, "My creation in the divine image is as a soul capable of love, sacrifice, and hope, not as a person, a perfect human being in mind or body. I want you to relate to me in that way, seeing me as God sees me. I am confident that even in the continuing damage of my temporal lobe might diminish the intensity of my God experience, there will be other ways in which I can maintain my relationship with God." And there I will pause just to see if we have questions before I go into some deep lists of applications. Any questions in the chat?
I have a verbal question.
Please, dear.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of questions because you brought up a lot of good stuff. But the one I'll go to right now is you were just talking about like your mother withdrawing from activities and certain kinds of dementia creating different kinds of behavior. So I'm curious your thoughts on how to carve out space for participation or even, dare I say, leadership for people experiencing dementia. Or is our role as pastors to help them grieve that they are no longer able to participate in the ways that they used to participate?
So I might add grief to that long list of sermonic themes. I think that's definitely one of the things that's happening for everybody. I mean, that's definitely one of those COVID themes, right? So the concept of loss and changing. And I think Claire has done such great work with her ministry with the elders in our church around what's supposed to happen when you're aging, which is change, right? Change is the constant in aging. And it's a lot of moments of I'm losing this ability, or this is shifting for me, or I gained another ability, or I can do something different. So I think that overlays, and I think that really having that present, I think helps bridge towards the conversations around dementia. And I also think that in some ways, there's gotta be a kind of, not like a formal checklist, which I shared before and will share again, but the way in which the person who may be as closest in relationship with them has a sort of consistent way of checking in and asking questions around what things might be different these days, what things might be more complicated. And really it's about making the space for people to admit that something's different. Again, my mom covered for so many months that there were hallucinations or that she was, hoarding, like she was buying paper towel, because she was afraid she was going to run out, but she wasn't checking all of her mirrors, as it were. For me, it's that intervention where there's one other person who's able to look and say, something's different there. Let's talk about what's changed. And can I help you with some of it? I'm not sure am I answering some of that question, Jack?
Yeah, I mean, the practical person in me is desiring like a very concrete, like these are the kind of answers that you can give, like they can do this activity or they can help with these sandwiches or, but I just,
right. Oh, no, you meant those kinds of things. Oh, for sure. No, so that's exactly what we have to work together to brainstorm. So yeah, if I had known this kind of stuff earlier, I definitely would have set up like envelopes and folded papers for my mom to do sort of administrative tasks. And a lot of that has to do with that deep pastoral knowledge where you know your members enough that you know what they love to do. There are some folks who want to keep baking or making something. So just assembling something like a peanut butter jelly sandwich and having them do that in repetition, something that is not a super complicated task for everyone else, but for them, they're finding meaning and they're sharing in what the rest of the church is doing together. But it's interesting, right? It's also very similar, as we talked last time, about those moments where you have to bring it in. It's like, so what do you want kids to help you do? So, I mean, when I'm cooking with a little kid, and not to be patronizing, but there are just different steps you have to set up for them to add the milk, mix the bowl, and you have to be concrete in those directions, which is the other way I think we have to invite folks with dementia into our activities in the church. It's a slow process, and it really builds on relationships, which I think in our postmodern world, we sometimes get to a moment where we think we know people who we're going to church with, but we don't really. So it's the lean in moment of not the performance of I go to this church, I'm a member of this church, but you know what? I really like fishing. Like, how do we get to the part of knowing what people loved doing as who they are in the core of themselves, so that when we want to replicate that or draw that back to the moment where they can, quote unquote, find themselves again, it's clearer than just, and I got to the place, whole nother seminar, in that my mother was a workaholic. So it's actually hard for me to find hobbies because she didn't have any. She just worked all the time. And so she read sometimes, she didn't sew, none of those things she did, because in her life, working was the most important thing, raising her daughter, going to work, going to church. So it's a whole nother conversation of how we can help people practice those moments in their life when they're just gonna breathe and not busy themselves with 100 things. So that later on, when you're sitting in a room quietly, maybe just, watching birds or listening to music will be a fulfilling experience, because it reminds you of something you filled your time with before, not all of the movement and the busyness, which definitely my mom still moves. She thinks she's like folding clothes or she's doing all kinds of activities because she wants to keep moving. That's her intention. I'd love to give you some more factuals, Jack and others, for the rest of our video. So I have like a whole bunch more to talk about, and you can pause me if other questions arise. So let's get back to some of that, see what we can find. Share, there's a button. There we go. All right, so application. Just to talk about my mom again briefly, using her as an example, specifically the things that people with dementia seem to need, what caregivers seem to need, and how we can prepare the congregation. Here we go. Dementia can make folks very anxious, paranoid, and sensitive in their sensory receptors. Early on, my mother's greatest fears were around darkness and being threatened. It took some very hard months for me to know that definitively. In describing my mother's room, I want to demonstrate how personal and intricate dealing with dementia becomes. An environment really matters. Her old bedroom had beautiful dark brown furniture and comforters, and she often experienced hallucinations around darker objects that contrasted too much with the walls and the floor. She used to have a lovely dining room table, but sat at that table all day in an unsupported chair for her back because she would forget to get up and move around. Now she loves her new recliner. Actually, today she's in a wheelchair, but these scenes are from when she was in her other room with a great recliner. Sometimes she was afraid of the blinds being open. She now enjoys the bright colored drapes, and the lamps bring her comfort. She can see if there are shadows. The calendar and display board were at eye level when she's in the chair next to her tissues. The table usually held her iPad and her remote control for the TV, which were very critical during COVID for her to have direct access for things. Oftentimes in dementia, your peripheral vision becomes diminished and you can only see in front of you. So placing things in direct view for folks is helpful for them to know what's around them to be active. What else? So across from the bed, we placed a digital clock that has the full date, including the day of the week, the month, and the date, along with the time of day. And she found that to be really reassuring because an analog clock is confusing because it takes interpretation. So again, all that time you spent in the first grade trying to remember what 5, 10, 15 stood for, that's happening for folks with certain levels of dementia. I then collected dozens of pictures of my mom in them throughout her life with specific people who she knows love her and she feels comfortable around. I placed them in mixed tiles and pasted them around the room, and they help her to remember who she is with those individuals. So those relationships are reinforced. My mother's chair faces the bathroom and the door so that no one can walk up behind her to startle her. So again, if your field of vision is just this, when a person comes from here, it's actually like, who are you? What are you doing? Even though you know them and she knows you, but when you come right in front of a person, it's a very different experience. My mother, that's right. And so she feels safer also when she can see the doors to know who's coming in. She used to be fixated with paper, as I described. She worked in this office all her life. So she was always collecting files and folders, and we tried to remove those elements from her bedroom so that she wouldn't be overwhelmed with that feeling of paper. So she still collects any piece of paper that comes toward her. You can see her, she'll just grab it and stack it next to her. But now they're just like the calendar or the little bulletins that come in the assisted living facility. But she's not thinking about bills and paying things because now she doesn't have stacks of paper around her. And lastly, we also removed the mirrors and abstract artwork from the wall. In the evening or moments of disorientation, some images cause more harm than good. What might seem to us to be a beautiful Picasso with a person's brain with dementia, they have to reorganize those pictures and they can actually seem more disorienting than necessary. But across from her chair is her favorite Van Gogh and a picture of church ladies descending stairs from the sanctuary. Those pictures make sense to her and they give her calm. My mom's room makes sense to her most of the time because she was a partner in planning it. So those are things you can invite families to do, is to do these things as a group to share those responsibilities. Also, consider what it feels like for a person living with dementia to be in their space. Walk through and imagine what could be confusing or scary. For my mother, I started to ask myself, when she's awake in the middle of the night, which happens in general for aging experiences, not getting sleep and being up in the middle of the night, but definitely in dementia, what would bring her calm that she wouldn't need help to achieve? And if she gets confused, what label in the daytime would she understand? So for a while, I think I put a label on that was like ceiling lights and so just crazy words that made sense to me. And she was like, what is this? And so I pointed and I said, well, what is this light? And she says, that's the bed light. So then I made the label of the bed light. It had to make sense to her. And the first round of pictures that I put in her first apartment made her sad. They were pictures of her parents. And when she saw them, she reflected on the fact that they weren't with her anymore, that they had passed away. She began to mourn in a sort of consistent cycle. And I had to remove those pictures and put different ones in so that she would have different feelings. It was a very interesting shift that happened emotionally just based on what she was looking at all day. In this apartment, I asked her opinion and then started to think about when she feels good about herself, what is she looking at? And it usually has to do with me, church, and her family. There's a whole wall of pictures of her alone at various parts of her life. And she loves this picture wall and mentions it to me often. She says it helps her to appreciate the different sides of herself, which I think is very cute. The most challenging shifts I had to make with addressing dementia were remembering that living is complex. Brains with dementia experience some damage and diminishment. Activities, ideas, and even objects can be challenging unless they are deconstructed or simplified. So this bottom left picture, 2 years ago, my mother called to ask me to get her a can opener for her oatmeal. And like a dutiful daughter, I ordered one on Amazon. Months later, when we discovered all the struggle she was experiencing in her home alone, we saw that the items in her cabinets, that some of them she was really having difficulty opening. So she had been poking holes in the can and trying to break open the top because she hadn't realized there was a lift tab to get to the oatmeal. So there are certain things that are just obvious to us sometimes and then not. So the bottle on the top left, my mom loves soaps. This Dove, I don't know if you've seen this bottle, but oh, it's cute. It's like modern. That little blue flip thing, she had no idea what was it for. She kept trying to open the bottle like this because this is how we generally open bottles, right? And because it didn't do that, she stopped using it. So you saw like 4 different bottles like this sort of stacked along the shower line in this moment of like, this isn't working. What's wrong with this stuff? Somebody fix it. My mother loved bathing, and there were some elements in the bathroom that caused her great fear. She was disturbed by images in mirrors from different angles. Also, deeply afraid that she was going to slip in the shower. And I say all these to say that you have to take time with your loved ones, with your congregants, and consider their aversions to behaviors or struggles. They're often related to real situations that they're experiencing, and they sometimes don't have the language to disclose it to you. So their aversion towards something or the resistance towards something can be a very real fear for them that's not obvious to us. So then she had a tough time with buttons and zippers and ties. And so we started to get things with elastics so that she didn't have to undo her jeans to go to the restroom because it just took forever for her to do it with her fingers. Just having pull-up pants, pull-down pants, everybody's having a better day. And my mother never wants to lose a sense of style. So this day, if I will go right now and check on her, she will say, how do I look? Because she always wants to know that. That was always important to her, and she continues to have that. And we've got to do our best to help them look the way they want to look. And then there are some days she could care less. and so that's the day that I care less also. Lastly, just for the picture, there are moments where she's got difficulty with the fork and knife, and there are specific kinds of forks and knives you can get that are larger and sort of rubbery, and so it's almost like grabbing a spoon. And so sometimes I really just give her the spoon alone. It's the easiest thing for her to use. Using a knife and a fork at this level of her dementia is just extra. It's not necessary. So those are just some examples that might help you. So the idea is that bathing and eating can become so complicated for someone with dementia. And that's not even something we're thinking about as a church member, as a friend. We're thinking about, oh, let me, other things. But sometimes just daily stuff, getting up and getting dressed can cause an argument, can cause stress between a caregiver and their loved one, just because doing those simple things is much more difficult now. I just want to flash the screen to show a picture of Christine Bryden and to give you a list of advocacy groups that help folks. Again, Christine Bryden is great because she developed dementia in her mid-40s. So she's an example of sort of living and walking through the diagnosis and having language to express all of the changes. She is still now 73 and she remains on the circuit to help people know about dementia. She's also a Christian. I've showed this slide before, but always want to list these behaviors. So for Jack, this is kind of a list. I didn't realize they were all happening at the same time. Some of them were a couple at the same time, but there got to be a point when they were all happening. And for me, that was like, okay, so this is dementia. I remember looking on a YouTube and I saw this video and I was like, why isn't this everywhere? So I continue to tell people, look for the UCLA Health Center behavioral training videos. They're a wonderful resource. In addition to Positive Approaches to Care with Teepa Snow and someone, I can't remember the woman's name, but her videos are called Care Blazers. Those are the three main resources I will share with everyone that I think are very practical. And moving right along, I have also shared this screen before, but just want to clarify these two important things. Attention and appreciation for retained abilities. So you've got to not just focus on the stuff that everyone can't do anymore, but all the stuff that they can. So again, to your issue, Pastor Jack, can she still fold clothes? Can she sort of take bread out of the bread bag? Even though it's a small thing, she wants to feel included, and there are plenty of things she can pay attention to. Generally, what I do start off with, I'll just ask her for advice sometimes in a conversation, construct a scenario, and I'll ask her, Mom, I've been trying to figure this out. Can you help me? And she's so eager to be my mom and lean in and help explain something to me. So it's a good conversation. And lastly, this visitation is everything. So if you're a clergy and you need to figure out how to solve these problems, how do we get to know what's happening with people? You've got to set up a visitation system, some way that people are going to make it into the person's home or meet them someplace that's convenient to them. My mother was completely resistant. She stopped letting anyone into her apartment. And these were her close friends. And I got to say, I've had friends who are in that space, and sometimes you just got to show up anyway. I was like begging people. I'm like, I know she sets up a date and then she cancels it, which is also a sign of depression. And she wouldn't let anyone in except us. And when we got in, we were like, oh my God, what has happened here? She couldn't manage it on her own. And that was why she was embarrassed. She didn't want to show people that. So people have reasons why they don't want you to come over. So there's a line of respect, but then there might be a close enough person, maybe not the pastor, but maybe a deacon, maybe a lay leader who says, you know what, I just need to get in there for 1 second. And then you can maybe break that passageway to open up to the next level of that person's healing. Couple more slides here. We have to address loneliness explicitly. Again, another topic that can be preached on or discussed. Sometimes it actually is a great door opener to just say, have you felt lonely lately? Most people will explain it to you. It's very rare that people lie on that one, in the sense that they want someone to know they're lonely, but they might be afraid to start off the conversation that way. And I think addressing loneliness is critical. This conversation about mobilizing social citizenship is a really important concept in helping people contribute to the social situation and activities in their community. And I discussed last time, but wanted to share this again, the relationship-centered care. So I feel like the only way to get at this is to build stronger relationships. There's not necessarily a quick fix. It just says, I trust people in my life, and if something happens to me, I will tell the people that I trust. So to me, the solution is to find as many ways that we can get people to trust us, to build relationships where they will tell us that something's different. They might not say dementia, they might not use big words or talk about medical issues, but they might just say, I don't feel like myself. I just need help. Can you help me? just a quick sort of topic moment. I am, as you can see, a very wordy person. You know, this is the way I was raised. My mother's also very wordy. And sometimes we would start a tiff because I used too many words. So I would say, hey, mom, what would you like to drink? Or then I'd give her like so many options. You want some orange juice, you want some lemonade, you want some milk, you want some water. And she lost me at the first option. So dementia, go slower. Often ask one thing at a time. Would you like tea? Then you got to pause, wait for her to process your question. Maybe she wants tea, maybe she doesn't. Mom, you want to listen to Aretha Franklin or Lou Rawls? Lou Rawls, she'll say, and then we play the music. And I'm happy to talk to you more about this picture of the Alexa Echo, which from Amazon, which is really helping us and helping my mom listen to music, and also for me to use as an intercom to talk to her because she can't use the phone anymore. These are the things that caregivers need. Quickly, I will say that caregivers are carrying a heavy burden and they are usually overwhelmed. And when you ask them how they are, they often say that they're fine, but they may not be. I think that most of the caregivers I know are underplaying this situation. So again, that's a listening skill moment of hearing certain things. There are also changes in caregivers. So people put on more weight. Their vision actually closes sometimes. They can actually have higher blood pressure, heart rate, and sugar rises. And sometimes it's really difficult to make decisions. So the irony of being a caregiver and all the things we have to decide is that the stress of being a caregiver makes it hard for us to see the bigger picture and to make decisions. And so if you see someone you love going through that process, that's also a moment of ministry and care. It's not even just about the person that they're taking care of, but that they need to chill. They need to take some breaths, and they need someone to come in and ask, hey, can I come and sit with her for a while, give you a moment or break a day off? I think that that system, if we coordinate that, it would be really strategically important. We also need to figure out some ways to offer the care options in our neighborhoods. People don't have all of the details, and a lot of them are at impasse financially, sort of psychologically. Can I move my mother out of my house or out of her apartment? How would that even be possible? What would the next steps be? So care options are important, connected to this particular list of senior safety and well-being, which the link is on the dementia resources sheet. In your pastoral love, it will be useful to acknowledge for yourself that our loved one may relate to the world differently since their diagnosis, and they remain in the care and concern of God. We look to you to hold the spiritual authority in knowing and believing that this person is worthy of visitation and that your care for them is an extension for godly action. Although you cannot carry this on your own either, pastors and ministers, you can't meet every need and challenge because you are also fragile and finite. So the role of the person providing pastoral care during this stage can be a ministry presence, assuring the person with dementia that they are unseparated from God's love and still part of the community, and that they will not be alone. And that is the message we need to continue to pass on to each person who is in lay leadership. I've heard it said, and it blessed me, simply that if you are there, you can remember a scripture. If you are there, you can sing a song. If you are there through God's Spirit, they will remember themselves through you. So you don't have to be the pastor, you just have to be you, and your relationship with God will be enough for you to connect with that person, or can be. I think that lay leaders need clear models. So that's what I'm trying to do, is collect as many models from different churches. Again, I think that Pastor Claire and Jack have done a great job with this. There has to be some explicit training. Today is really just an intro. I'd love to go deeper into the teacher world of this is what you say when, role plays, those kinds of things. They need time to figure out how to listen. So there should be coordinated moments, maybe in the church calendar, where there's a weekend where you reach out to one person and the activity is to go over for tea or to sit outside on their steps to check in with them in different ways. Sometimes I just need phone numbers so I can make sure how to drop in on folks or emails to connect with them. And then some folks don't really feel comfortable praying or don't have language for that. So maybe some specific templates around conversation starters or the prayers to pray when a person wants or is seeking healing or peace have been helpful in my experience. So yes, that was a lot. And there's still plenty more. But this list can be a short, tangible task list of things to consider next for your faith community if you haven't already started them. Just like you would for a person in a wheelchair, you should travel through your space of your faith community and ask yourself what could be a hindrance and what could help. My mom one time was trying to sing the hymnal in a church, and she didn't remember that the first verse starts on the first line and then goes to the next brace of music. So she sang the first verse, the second verse, the third verse, the fourth verse. So simple things like that, if there are ways to think through how to make the liturgy even more clear for a person in its written form, those are the things we can start making changes for. Definitely, there should be an elder care ministry and signs that are clear. Sometimes you're just having a freak out moment or you're anxious and you need a place to regroup. So as much as there is a room for women during breastfeeding, is there a freak out room, as for lack of a better term? That's something to think about. And then, of course, we've discussed this at our church, is training the visitation buddies beyond the quiet, passive friend, but the friend who's having some issues. How do you actually restrain a person? Or Teepa Snow walks through lots of ways you can hold a person's hand to suggest them to move a certain direction or to get up and follow you so that they can find a way to feel more at peace. Lastly, I have found that caregiver support groups have been the most helpful for me in my personal experience as a caregiver in just finding a moment of affinity. So that's really my last slide for sure. And I'll stop sharing my screen if there are any things to say or any questions of folks right now. Silence. She said too much. She said too little. Okay.
I don't think you said too much. I'm just sitting with everything.
No, it's so much, but I figured if we're recording it that way, people can go back and take notes or consider the questions that they have that are really weighing on their hearts.
Well, I was thinking about this walkthrough and like having the eye for the space and church and liturgy and all those things. Is that something you are working on developing, like a checklist for congregations that we can like hire you as like consultant or
Sure, you can hire me, but Dementia Friends has a lot of material. So I work with Dementia Friends, and that's one of their main brochures, is to discuss the ways in which the term is a dementia friendly church. So I'm happy to share, distribute those, and walk through them. But when you even think about Spring Glen, it's a wonderful vestibule, but it can actually be overwhelming when you first come in because you don't necessarily know where to go. You don't know where the sanctuary is. You don't know where the bathroom is, which are the two things most people come into the first building to find. So it's just those simple moments of like, what will happen then when I'm looking around and being confused? How will I get to where I need to go? So yeah, I'm happy to walk through those with you and others to discuss the, bare bones things that can, tangibly be done as we continue to work on this relationship stuff.
Dawn, yes, I have a question, which is just, I think, very simple in terms of greeting a person who you know has been diagnosed with dementia. What's the appropriate, you don't want to ask, how are you? You don't want it to be too open-ended. And I just wonder what that would be. I know that people have asked me, and I also recognize my own inability to say, what would it be? What would be helpful to that person? I don't need to know things, right? Most of the time, I'm not looking for information. Right. I'm looking to connect. Correct. So what would be that language?
Okay, so things are really about the present and the now, and they can also be about you. So, hi, Claire. It's so good to see you. Wow, this is a really beautiful day outside, isn't it? Most likely that's helping you. You can start there. I just love the way that Pastor Jack sets up these services. I'm going to try and sit closer today. Are you going to sit closer? So yes, no questions are helpful. And I also sometimes want to continue to use the person's name as much as I can so they can remember who they are. And I might need to say my name sometimes, which is like, I'm Dawn. Ha ha. And also with my mother, as I said, sometimes I'll say, hi, mommy, and she doesn't do anything. And then I'll say, hey, Alma, and she'll say, hey, Puddin'. So just hearing her name, she knows to engage in a conversation. But I would say to stick to the conversation, make the conversation focus on the moment that you're in,
Okay.
and also reflect on you. So you can say, wow, I am certainly tired today. Are you tired? Are you feeling excited to be at church? So I kind of name what the options are so they can choose them. So they're not as open-ended as could be. And honestly, sometimes silence is enough, in the sense of like, do you mind if I hold your hand? Would you have to wait to ask for them to say something? But people, my experience, sometimes a touch in that way can be really reassuring. It helps them know that they're there, if that makes any sense, and that someone definitely has a hold of them. And then you can, when you have their hand, you can take people wherever they need to go. That makes sense, right? So if they need to leave, or they need to stay, or sit closely or tight, you can communicate a lot of things, if you can think of the Helen Keller world, with your hand, in ways that I think we try to do with our mouth and our words that are more confusing.
Okay. And I mean, I know we're over time, but I'll just throw this out there.
Sure.
Conversations with the caregiver.
Yes.
It may be either standing there or not,
Yes.
in terms of not, again, these boundaries of not really asking how are things going today, or are things getting better, or, just starting off the wrong foot because you want it to be better, right?
Yes.
And it's not going to be. And I just wonder how you would address that.
I think it depends on closeness, but I do have friends who I'm close enough with where I'll simply just say, hey, good day or bad day. Just to give them the option, as opposed to having to even think, because sometimes you're so tired, you can't think. You just want somebody to give you options, which is similar. And my wife keeps helping me with this. In the moments of real ministry care, giving the option of how you can help them is also helpful, which is to say, you know what, Tuesday I am free during lunch and I would love to come by and just sit with your cousin. How's that sound? As opposed to, how can I help you? Because there's a long list of things to help you with. But if you sort of get in touch with what you feel your availability is, what you know you can do, and you offer that, even at the least, it helps the person know what people can do. Because sometimes I can't even think about those kinds of things, right?
Yes, that's very helpful.
So it's just, you kind of have to ground in the moment again. And that's what I think my brain starts to think about for dementia. Most things are about right now. They're not about last week and last month, because I might not have access to those. Sometimes the future will work, but definitely the question is, what's happening right now? Wow, it's really chilly in here. Do you need your sweater? Whatever you feel in that moment was usually where I try to start with the conversation.
Yeah, that's great.
With
Thank you very much. It's very practical.
Jumping off of what you just said about like offering specific ways of help, right? Like, I get the sense that caregivers feel this shame or this guilt for putting burden on people.
Correct.
And so even if an idea is implemented to offer the help that they specifically asked for from people who they know as intimate, close friends, and then they're like, no, just kidding, we don't want that. We don't want to bother anybody, or they hire an aide to do that work instead, or whatever it is. I don't know if I have a specific question, but so much just like
it's just real.
About that.
That's very real.
And do you take the lead of that caregiver, or how do you get them over that sense of that? I mean, maybe it's not the practical, like getting them to accept the help, but like how that spiritual worry about being a burden to the world.
I mean, that's just real. And so I guess to me, the heart of that is our job is to minister. Like, that's a sermon, right? Like, where is this shame coming from? How do we get to train people to realize that handling everything on their own is actually not God's will for our lives? And then once Pastor Jack preaches that, I can quote it to the person. Listen, Pastor Jack just said, now look, I need you to help me here because I'm trying to do my part, what God is calling me to do. Now I need you to help me take you to lunch. I had a friend that's done that. It's like a weird twist, but I was like, wait, what? This is about you? So all of a sudden, but it kind of takes burden off me, right? Because I am still trying to help them, because all of us caregivers are always trying to help everybody else anyway. And so that's part of, what goes on. I actually do have to wrap soon because I have to go to another meeting. But this issue here is, yes, diminishing the shame. And as many options are out there, you do what you can to offer them. And if people still don't take them, you can't force them. But, I think that there are ways to sidle up in love, specifically in that moment, if the person brings the person to church and you're just like, I would love to go in the garden with you right now. Would you come with me? So that way you take the person with dementia with you, and the caregiver has no control. And they now just have a moment to stand there and figure out, wow, I'm standing here by myself. Okay, fantastic. And this in general, the other part is, am I a trustworthy person? So I think that's always my question for myself as a person in the world. How can I help a person know that I'm going to be able to handle this, right? As a dean, I always try to communicate that to my kids. Like, you can't bring me anything that is so tough, twisted, and crazy that it's going to melt me down, right? Bring it. What is it? Abuse, addiction? Come on. I've seen it before, and I can hold you with this, right? And I think that that's another issue for lay caregivers, so that people don't seem so wilty, right, and delicate that a person who screams a profanity in the middle of service won't have us all leave the church. So I think, the more we can demonstrate our mettle helps people know, okay, they're not going to freak out if something embarrassing happens, because something embarrassing is going to happen. And I need to know that you're going to be okay with that. So there's got to be some way for us to sort of practice that again, or demonstrate it, or there'll be a conversation around it. So friends, I have to wrap in prayer because I'm supposed to be someplace. But I thank you all for your time. And as I say, most kind Creator, thank you for holding us all in your memory and your care. Thank you for knowing our names, even if we forget our own. Thank you for your vision of human community, that we all have enough to care for one another, that we are not mere individuals, but that suffering and celebration are collective, that who I am is made up of who you made me to be and the story that people on this Zoom will tell about me. As we journey through loss and grief and cognitive decline that is likely and inevitable, be with us. Show yourself gentle and show yourself strong. Holy Spirit, shower us with your holy love and rejoice over us with singing. In the name of Christ, the resurrected, I pray, as you pray to the God of your own understanding. Thank you, friends. And please, everyone know that you can call me, ask me questions at dawn_Jefferson@hopeucc.org. And I'm happy to answer questions as we move forward. Looking forward to the next sessions. This next clergy session is next Wednesday at the same time, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we have a session coming this Sunday and Monday. We'll be putting those on the web and in the chat for people to find a way to us. And we'll also share the survey for future clergy members if they want to have questions to clarify how we can fine-tune these conversations.
Thank you.
Love to you all. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.